There's a name for what happens about 6 months after the last day of work, after the initial relief has settled, after the travel, the dinners, the first real stretch of mornings with nothing demanded. It isn't depression. It isn't ingratitude. It isn't a sign that something went wrong. It is one of the most predictable transitions in the psychology of high-achieving professionals, and almost no one names it clearly enough to be useful. This video is about that transition, what it is, why it ends, and more importantly, why it ends harder for the people who worked hardest. Because the answer to that last question changes everything about what you do next. The retirement honeymoon phase is real. It's documented in the psychology of professional transitions. It has a consistent shape, and it follows a timeline that is remarkably similar across careers: executive, physician, engineer, administrator, principal. The shape looks like this. The final weeks before retirement are typically high intensity. The farewell events, the handoffs, the emotional weight of an ending. Then the last day arrives. And immediately after, something genuine happens. Relief. Not performed relief. Real relief. The absence of the alarm. The absence of the inbox. The absence of the weight of consequence that followed you home every evening for 35 years. And for a period, weeks, sometimes several months, that relief is enough. Travel fills some of it. Family fills some of it. The simple novelty of a Tuesday morning that belongs entirely to you fills some of it. This is the honeymoon phase. And there is nothing wrong with it. Now, here's the part that almost no one says clearly. The honeymoon phase is not a reward, it's a neurological exhale. Your nervous system, which had been operating under chronic productive demand for decades, finally decompressed. That decompression was real. It was necessary. It was earned. But decompression is not the same as arrival. And at a certain point, and the research on professional identity transition puts this consistently between 4 and 8 months post-retirement, the exhale completes. And something else begins. That transition is what you're here about. To understand why the honeymoon ends, you need to understand something that was installed in you, quietly, without anyone naming it, over the course of a career built on achievement. Call it the conditional-value equation. It works like this. For 35 or 40 years, every time you solved a hard problem, something real happened as a result. Someone's situation improved. A decision got made. A project came together. An organization moved. And the people around you noticed. Your phone rang. You were consulted. You were the one in the room whose judgment changed the outcome. The brain, which is a very efficient pattern recognition system, registered all of that and drew a conclusion, not consciously, not as a decision, as an inference, built from thousands of data points across decades. The inference was, my value is a function of my output. When I produce, I matter. When I solve, I exist. When I contribute, I am someone. That equation is not a pathology. It is a logical conclusion from 40 years of evidence. Now, here's what retirement did. It didn't remove the capability. It didn't remove the expertise, the intelligence, the accumulated judgment. It removed the mechanism, the institutional structure that automatically turned capability into consequence. The honeymoon phase temporarily suspended the equation. There was enough novelty, enough earned relief justification, enough activity to keep it quiet, but the equation never stopped running. This is why the honeymoon ends. Not because the travel wasn't good enough, not because the hobbies weren't stimulating enough, not because you weren't trying hard enough to relax. The honeymoon ends because the equation resumed and found nothing to process. And this is why it ends harder for people who built careers like yours. The more deeply the equation was installed, the more your career demanded of you, the more consequence your decisions carried, the more your identity was fused with your professional function, the more acutely you feel its absence. The research on professional identity and retirement transition is consistent on this point. High-achieving professionals don't struggle with retirement despite their capability. They struggle because of it. The people who feel the end of the honeymoon hardest are not the ones who weren't successful enough. They are the ones who were most successful. If that describes your situation, you are not experiencing a regression. You are experiencing a predictable consequence of having built something real. Here is the reframe that changes what you do with this. The end of the honeymoon phase is not the retirement going wrong. It is the retirement beginning. The honeymoon phase was real, but it was also a buffer, a necessary one, a A grace period between one identity structure and whatever comes next. What you're feeling now, the restlessness, the low-grade disorientation, the quiet question that surfaces every morning that you've been trying not to examine, is not a symptom of failure. It is the first accurate signal. Your restlessness is not a problem. It is a signal. And the question worth asking, the only question worth asking at this point in the transition, is not how to quiet it. It is what it is pointing toward. Because here is what the restlessness is actually telling you. It is telling you that the conditional value equation is still running, that the capacity that built your career did not retire when you did, that the expertise you accumulated, the specific knowledge, the judgment that can't be taught in a classroom, the network that took 30 years to build, is still present, still intact, still looking for somewhere to go. The end of the honeymoon phase is the moment when a very specific question becomes unavoidable. Not, what do I do with my time? That is the wrong question. That is the question of someone diagnosing the problem as boredom. The right question is, what does someone with my specific expertise, my specific credibility, my specific accumulated experience actually need in order to feel that something is still happening because of them? That is a different question, and it has a different kind of answer. The expertise doesn't retire. Only the title does. If this is the moment in the transition you're in, if the honeymoon is faded and what replaced, it still doesn't have a name you fully trust. There's a 5-day process in the description designed for exactly this inflection point. It doesn't ask you to reinvent yourself. It asks you to look clearly at what was installed, what it's costing you, and what it would take to begin replacing it with something that belongs to you rather than to the institution. The link is in the description. The pinned comment has it as well. Let's take a closer look at what Phase 2 actually requires, because this is where a critical misconception tends to take hold. Phase 2 is not a content problem. The instinct, and it's a reasonable one, is to treat the end of the honeymoon as a scheduling problem, to look for the right activity, the right project, the right thing to fill the mornings with. And there's nothing wrong with activity, but activity that doesn't engage the conditional value equation at the level it was installed will not resolve the disorientation. It's the difference between distraction and direction. Distraction quiets the equation temporarily. It does not answer it. Direction, building something with actual consequence, contributing expertise to a problem that actually matters, being consulted because your specific knowledge changes an actual outcome that engages the equation at the level it needs. What distinguishes the professionals who navigate Phase 2 successfully is not that they found better activities. It's that they stopped diagnosing the problem as boredom and started diagnosing it as a framework mismatch. The framework they were given, retire, relax, enjoy the reward, was designed for a different era. It was designed for people whose careers had physically exhausted them, for people who were not going to live another 25 active years past 65, for people whose expertise had a shorter shelf life. That is not your situation. Your expertise has a shelf life measured in decades, not months. Your network, built over 30 years of professional relationships, is a resource that most people in their 30s would spend a career trying to build. Your judgment, the specific capacity to read a situation, weigh a decision, and know from experience what actually happens when you choose one path over another, cannot be replicated by someone without your history. Phase 2 requires a framework that takes all of that seriously, not a second career in the corporate sense, not a performance of busyness designed to justify yourself to your family or your former colleagues, something built on your terms, with your expertise as the foundation, contributing to something real in a way that confirms, not to anyone else, but to you, that the equation still has somewhere to go. That is what this channel is built to help you find. And it begins with understanding exactly where you are, which, if this video landed the way it was intended, you understand a little more clearly now than when you arrived. If what this video opened is something you want to go further with, the 5-day process in the description was built for exactly this moment in the transition. Not the beginning, not the end, this specific moment, when the honeymoon is over and Phase 2 needs a name. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. What was the moment you realized the honeymoon feeling had shifted? And what did you tell yourself about it when it did? Here is what to carry out of this video. The restlessness you've been treating as a personal failure, the inability to simply relax into what you worked toward for 40 years, the feeling that something important is still unfinished, is not a flaw. It is not ingratitude. It is not a personality problem or a sign that you are constitutionally incapable of peace. It is a predictable psychological consequence of having the mechanism that turns your capability into consequence removed without a replacement being offered. The retirement industry will not tell you that clearly, because telling you that clearly makes the entire framework itself somewhat difficult to defend. But you came here, which means some part of you already knew it. The honeymoon phase ending is not the retirement going wrong. It is the first real data about who you are and what you actually need. And the question that phase 2 is asking, quietly, every morning, in the specific weight of the silence, is not, what do I do with my time? It is, what does someone who spent 35 years becoming genuinely expert at something actually owe themselves in the chapters that remain? The answer to that question is not nothing. And the restlessness you've been trying to manage? That is not the problem. That is the signal that the answer matters. The only question now is what it is pointing toward.